I'd like to welcome you all to this legislative hearing, and all of your complete and written statements will be entered in the hearing record. And Congressman Stivers, we will start with you. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing on important legislation today, including my Place of Remembrance Act. This bill would create a place of remembrance at Arlington National Cemetery for veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts and all contingency operations moving forward. I was shocked and horrified like everybody else when I read in the Washington Post on December 7th that Dover Air Force Base Mortuary Affairs had been sending unidentified remains of soldiers to Prince George's County landfill. They actually uncovered that 976 fragments from 274 military personnel were cremated and then taken to a landfill between 2004 and 2008. I think this is an outrage, and we've got to fix it permanently. Creating a proper memorial as a place of remembrance for these remains and a final resting place with honor for those who served, I think would ensure that a tragedy like this never occurs again. I understand that the Department of Defense has changed the procedures to ensure that those cremated unidentified remains are now the ashes are spread at sea. However, while this may be a satisfactory temporary measure, as an Army officer and veteran, I believe in the warrior ethos, which says never leave a fallen comrade behind. And I think bringing home those unidentified remains and putting them in a place of remembrance, of honor, is the proper long-term solution. So on May 10th, I introduced H.R. 5735 that authorizes the Secretary of the Army to establish an appropriate location at Arlington National Cemetery as a place of remembrance for interring those cremated remains. And it will make sure that any unclaimed remains or unidentified DNA has an appropriate final resting place. I understand that there's a significance associated with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This legislation is not intended to detract from that honored memorial, and that's why we're going to be renaming it the Place of Remembrance as opposed to a Tomb of Remembrance to avoid any conflict. My bill would allow for new and future generations of heroes to have a place of remembrance for each conflict moving forward, for fallen unidentified patriots from those conflicts. Those who've given their final measure of devotion in the service of our great nation deserve a final resting place worthy of their dedication, commitment, and devotion. So I hope that you'll favorably consider this bill and give it every consideration. I appreciate you holding the hearing and look forward to working with you on any issues associated with the legislation. I do want to thank Debbie Lee, a Gold Star mother, coming for the second panel to testify in favor of this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman Stivers. Ms. Lee, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
On behalf of our fallen, let me start over. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on behalf of our fallen warriors who gave up their lives and their voices defending you and I. The freedoms that you and I enjoy every single day and often take for granted are paid for by the brave men and women who for centuries have sacrificed greatly, many giving their very last breath defending America. There is a price for our freedom, and our family knows it all too well. My son, Mark Allen Lee, was the first Navy SEAL killed in Iraq on August 2nd, 2006. Many of you may remember Ramadi in 2006 was a bloody battlefield. The SEALs had been in an intense firefight for 2 hours in 120-degree temperatures. 4 of the SEALs were on a rooftop when Mark's buddy Ryan was shot and had severe shrapnel injuries to the head. They could tell by looking at him it didn't look good. They didn't know if he would survive the next few moments. 2 of the SEALs dropped to their knees to help Ryan. Mark could have made the very same choice, but he made the choice to stand up into the direct line of fire, hoping the enemy would fire on him and they could sneak the medic up to the roof. They successfully got the medic up there, and he took one look at Ryan and said, "We've got to get him out of here immediately, or there's no chance for survival." So a second time, Mark made the choice to stand up into the direct line of fire to provide the cover so they could get down off of that roof. When they got done, they sent Ryan off in medevac, and they crawled back in their Bradleys. They headed back to the base, which I'm proud to tell you was named Camp Mark Lee in his memory. And as they got in there, they started to rip off their gear and they got some water to refresh themselves. You know, we've watched our Navy SEALs do some absolutely amazing things lately. But that was Mark's final gift to me, was his teammates. I know them very well. I know they were exhausted emotionally, physically. And the chief came in and he said, "We just found 30 of the insurgents that just attacked us." And without hesitation, Mark looked at his chief and he said, "Roger that, let's go get them." So they climbed back in their Bradleys and they headed back into Ramadi. They cleared several houses and they went in the last house that Mark would be in. Cleared the bottom of the house and started to proceed up the steps when they heard Mark yell, "On me!" And they knew that meant he was going to take the lead and they were to follow. And as they went up those steps, for the final time, they drew fire through a window. Mark made the choice again to turn into that line of fire. He willingly gave his life for you, for me, for this country that he so loved. I've dedicated my life to our troops, to their families, and especially to the families of the fallen. Mark successfully completed his mission, and I know where he is, and one day I will see him again. He laid down his boots and his weapon. He gave all of his tomorrows so that we could have today. In response to Mark's last letter home, I founded America's Mighty Warriors and used my voice and have dedicated my life to honoring and supporting our troops and defending our defenders and taking care of our Gold Star families. They've given their very best for this nation. So today I speak on behalf of our fallen heroes and their families. When our loved ones signed to defend our country against enemies foreign and domestic, they knew they could be giving their lives for this country and for what they believed in. They fought honorably and nobly, and I know that if you asked them if they were to die in combat, their first request would be to take care of my family. As family members, we entrusted our loved ones' lives into the hands of our military and our government, and we expect that, God forbid, they didn't make it back into our arms. That as a nation, we would respect and honor them every step of the way as the heroes they are, and bring them back home to a proper and dignified burial. I've watched videos and heard stories of how Mark was escorted home. From the moment he was carried off the battlefield by his teammate who was a medic, who administered CPR on Mark for 30 minutes until they got to the hospital, knowing that Mark was already dead, hoping somehow to revive him, to the honor line as they loaded Mark on his Angel flight back home, where all branches of the military in Ramadi had gathered to pay respects to a fallen hero. I can't begin to imagine receiving the news that they'd found another fragment of Mark and learning that instead of burying that part of Mark respectfully, that he was sent to the dump like 274 of our fallen heroes were. These men and women gave their lives under horrific battle conditions, many having been blown to pieces by IEDs or RPGs. And for years, their remains were carelessly sent to the dump with the garbage. Just this past week, it was brought to light that a veteran had been found buried in a cardboard box in a cemetery in Florida. We're still working on locating remains in Vietnam. Why would we as a nation not have an honorable and dignified place to bury the remains of our war heroes? Congressman Stivers has introduced a bill to have a place of remembrance in Arlington, where the ashes of unidentifiable or partial remains of our heroes can be laid to rest with dignity. Thank you, Congressman Stivers, for standing for your fallen brothers and choosing to be a voice when they have none. I hope each one of you see the urgency to pass this bill, H.R. 5735, and guarantee our troops and their families that we will continue to honor those who gave everything and ensure we will never forget them, their families, or the sacrifices that have been made for our freedoms. Thank you, and Hoo-yah Mark Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and thank you for your sacrifice and your testimony and your heartfelt, I would say story, but it's a reality, but thank you.